I've just disembarked one of the world's strangest cruises where nobody on board had any idea where the ship was sailing to. We only found out each day when we arrived in port. The cruise was with a traditional cruise line, and although it's not the kind of cruise line I usually book with for a few reasons, I could not resist the mystery, so I decided to give it a go. This cruise was one of the most expensive that I've ever booked in terms of price per night, but I was hopeful that I would enjoy both the ports and the experience on the ship. I did have a lot of questions though. How would we book excursions for a cruise where we didn't know where we were going? What about travel insurance? What would I pack if I couldn't look up the weather forecast? What would happen if we had ports that I really didn't like? And would I have paid for this cruise if I knew what would really happen? It was all a bit of a risk, and it turned out very different from any cruise that I've ever taken before. Not just the mystery part either, from the entertainment on board to a medical evacuation, things weren't as I expected. Normally when you embark a cruise, you'll see your ship appear over the horizon, probably with blue skies behind it, and ideally you will be on board for lunch. That was not the case on this cruise though, because my boarding time was 5:30 p.m. and it was pitch black. That is very late by any cruise's standards, but it was for a reason. Our ship had been in dry dock getting a few updates the week before, and it had just overrun slightly. I hoped that the rest of the trip would make up for missing out on that first afternoon on board, but it is always a shame to miss any time on any cruise. I hope that the ongoing building works wouldn't affect us at all, and that we wouldn't be cruising on a floating building site. The only thing I knew about the first port at this point was a few little clues that were given to us by the cruise line. One said that the wind carries the scent of salt, waffles, and adventure. Most cruise ports are salty, of course they're by the sea, and I would say every cruise port is an adventure, so that only left waffles as a clue. The description did describe cobblestones and seagulls, but that didn't really narrow it down. If you have any ideas, do let me know in the comments and we will see if you were right. Embarkation was incredibly easy. There were no queues at all at my boarding time. I do suspect that a lot of people ignored the boarding delay and they came earlier, but I do like to do what I'm told, and it actually worked out quite well for me because the embarkation in total probably took 10 minutes. The cruise ship that I was boarding was called Borealis, and she is owned by the traditional British cruise line Fred Olsen. On all cruises with Fred Olsen, dining times for dinner are fixed, and there usually is table sharing. Not just table sharing at dinner, but also breakfast and lunch too, even in the buffet. I'm not a fan of table sharing with strangers when I cruise, but I had managed to reduce the chances of that pre-cruise by booking this cruise as a group of 4. Most cruise lines have got rid of the assigned fixed dining now, and it does feel like quite an old-fashioned thing to me. Plenty of people love it though. I'd requested early dining and I was given it, which was great. The problem was I knew that the early dining time was 6 p.m. and I was boarding the ship at 5:30. I really didn't want to miss dinner, but it was completely out of my control if we would make it or not. It did seem like a big ask, but I am ever hopeful. I knew that there were other food options on board, of course, but I did want to meet my friends who were already on board and at dinner. Otherwise, they would just be sat there waiting for us, and that would be sad. At this point when I boarded, I didn't know what my table number was, so I headed straight to my cabin where I found a piece of paper with that information. I'd booked an ocean view cabin, and my favourite thing by far was this tiny little bath. My first impressions of the cabin generally were great, and they were for the rest of the ship too. It all felt so grand. I love these carpets, and it did feel like being in another world. I almost felt transported back in time. Finding my cabin was very easy because it was on deck 2 and the ship isn't very big. Borealis is 237 metres long, which is roughly the same as 23 London double-decker buses in a row. That might sound huge, but by modern cruise ship standards, she's a pretty small ship. The current world's biggest cruise ship can hold 5 times as many guests. I was hopeful that that would mean that our mystery ports might be ones that the big ships don't go to. Our ship could fit down the rivers and into the ports that most ships don't. We made it to dinner with only a couple of minutes to spare, and I was so excited and just happy to be on board. We watched the sail away from our table, but we had no idea where the cruise was actually going. The main dining room on board Borealis is split over 2 levels, and every guest has a table assigned here. It is very grand and there are windows on 3 sides. As it was dark, I could usually only see myself in the windows, but we did have a couple of great meals in here. The menu even has its own tassels, which I think makes it very fancy. The food lived up to the quality promised by the menu tassels, so we were all very happy with everything that we ordered. I even had a toad in the hole, which I have always joked is my dream dinner on a cruise, but I have never ever found it before. This was the first of many British touches on board, which I loved. For those of you who don't already know, a toad in the hole is sausages inside a Yorkshire pudding, which is made out of a kind of batter. That's the first of probably many Britishisms of this week. We chatted a little bit about where we thought we were going. We knew, of course, that we couldn't get too far away in a day, but there were a few likely options. I guessed Bruges or Le Havre, or maybe somewhere like Rotterdam for the second port. We also considered ports like Antwerp, which I would have really liked because I've never been there before. The thing that I thought made it easier to guess where the destination was that on this board by reception it had information about how long it would take to drive into town and if we would need to get a shuttle bus or not. That would actually trip me up on the second port though, and I would guess it wrong. Borealis started her life as Rotterdam for Holland America Cruise Line, and she was built in 1997. A lot of the parts of the ship, like this incredible atrium, have remained pretty much the same since back then, and she can hold over 1,000 guests in over 700 different cabins. One thing that I love about older cruise ships is that they normally have a big bar or a big lounge that is up high. It's called something like the crow's nest or the observation lounge, and I was very happy to find one on the deck plans. We headed there after dinner, and in here they would do karaoke, they would have live music, and they hosted the silent disco in here. It was so much fun, and it was so much more fun than I ever expected it to be. It was so relaxing to just have the headphones on, to sing along to the songs, and to watch everybody dancing. It was anything but silent, and I loved watching everybody have a great time. There were two channels inside the headphones, the green and the blue, and both would play different songs. At one point, inside one channel was the famous Kings of Leon song about being on fire, and in the other side was Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive, and hearing those two sung out loud at the same time was really quite funny. I mentioned earlier that Fred Olsen aren't a cruise line that I would usually pick to cruise with, and that is mostly because of the fact that they are quite traditional, and also the average age is a lot older than me. I don't see that as a problem at all, but I was probably half the age of the average guest. They had a talk in the theatre about inheritance tax, and I do think that tells you everything you need to know. Important topic, I'm sure, but not exactly for me right now. I think the age range on this cruise might have actually been a bit younger than normal because it was a short cruise, and generally the shorter the cruise, the younger the passengers. The amount of live music around the ship was a real big perk for me. There was almost always some somewhere. It might be a man with a guitar, maybe a trio of strings, or it could be the house band, but there would always be some music somewhere. All of the musicians were great, of course, and they played a wide variety of music. Sometimes on a cruise, I find that there isn't food available late at night, or maybe it's just something like pizza. So I was very happy when I saw that just along from the observation lounge in the buffet, it was open for late night snacks. They call it Supper Club, of course, very fancy. It was in here that I found the most amazing cookies. I cannot describe how good they were. I could eat these cookies every single day of my life and I would never get bored. They were like thick sugar biscuits, and ending my day with one of these was the perfect end to the first day. They had other food too, of course, like sandwiches and hot dogs. The buffet itself was pretty big, and I knew that I would have to come back here for lunch and for dinner. I didn't feel as though I'd seen a lot of the ship at this point because I really hadn't. I'd not seen any of the main lounges, I'd not seen the theatre, the promenade deck, or the pool yet, and we still didn't know where we were going. It was such a strange feeling, but I loved it. I was half expecting there to be some sort of announcement in the evening that would tell us where we were going, but there wasn't. We didn't find out until the morning when we were actually in the port. Luckily for me, I'd booked an ocean view cabin so I could at least see the view in the morning. If you were in an inside cabin, you really would have no idea at all where you were. From the very second that I pressed that book button on this cruise, I said, I bet we are going to Bruges. Bruges is on almost every Northern Europe itinerary, and given that we left Portsmouth for a 5-day cruise, it wasn't as though we could really leave Northern Europe. That made it easy to buy travel insurance too. Most policies cover Europe as a whole, and my policy does, so I didn't have to worry. We would have a helicopter evacuation later in the cruise, which just highlights how important travel insurance is. You can see here on my Cruise Globe map just where it happened, and I love seeing these little quirks. You can see every single cruise that you have ever taken just like this completely for free on my website and my app, the Cruise Globe. Do be careful though, because the Cruise Globe does have a live mode where you can see where any cruise ship is live, and it will tell you where that cruise ship is going. So if you are on a mystery cruise, don't have a look until you're actually in port. I was not surprised at all as I saw the familiar shipping containers of Zeebrugge when I went to the buffet for breakfast. The port itself is a bit tricky because you do have to get a bus out of the port and then you have to get a train or a transfer into Bruges. It's actually quite far inland, but it is well worth a visit. I've been to Bruges plenty of times before, so I headed to Blankenberge as Fred Olsen have free shuttle buses that went there. It was here that I found these very interesting baby statues, and I'm sure that with blue skies, this would be a really nice place to spend time. It was a nice place to spend time anyway, of course, but it does feel like a summer city. The fact that the shuttle bus was included was a nice touch, as most mainstream and budget cruise lines do charge for this. As I mentioned earlier, Fred Olsen definitely aren't a budget cruise line, but for all that's included and the onboard prices, I don't think that I paid a bad price at all. I only booked this cruise a month or two in advance as well, and I'll let you know at the end of this video how much I ended up spending in total, including things like gratuities and Wi-Fi. When we came back from the port, we were offered a glass of hot blackcurrant squash, and if that doesn't sum up the Britishness of Fred Olsen, I don't know what does. I'm sure we must have had this one before, but squash is basically a juice that you dilute with water. It's usually served cold, but it can also be made hot, kind of like tea. Blackcurrant is a very popular flavour for things here, and I love it. I don't normally realise how much I miss British things like this until I go back to cruising on British cruise lines. The biggest cruise lines in the world, they're all American, so it's really quite strange to see British sites like custard creams in the buffet. Custard creams are the best biscuits in the world, of course, and I would say they're around 15 times better than the chocolatey bourbon alternative and 150 times better than Oreos. In the buffet for dinner, you're seated by the crew, usually at a shared table, which is not something that I'm used to on cruises. You normally just get your own food, you sit down where you'd like, but that does leave some people wandering around trying to find a seat, so I do understand why they do this. They just want to make sure that everyone has a table, which is good. I do often just pick up food and wander off with it though. Maybe I sit outside, or maybe I take the food back to my cabin. We could still do that on this cruise, of course, but I would just have to explain, I'm just getting a cookie. I don't want to sit down. I just want that cookie. We met loads of lovely people on this cruise when we were table sharing and just generally around the ship. The fact that we were on this mystery trip together gave everybody an easy conversation topic to kind of start with, and I met so many people who were cruising solo and some people for which this was their first cruise ever. They were all very happy though, and I never heard anybody complain about anything, which is really, really rare. I can't emphasize how rare that is. I have cruised on luxury river ships, I've cruised on yachts, and even on there people still complain about things, but the Fred Olsen bunch just seemed like a happy group. There were loads of options in the buffet and it is mostly served to you. The food was great and there were always so many crew members around who were getting drinks and tidying up. All of the food in here is included in the cruise fare, as is all the food in the main dining room. I knew that I would be eating in here on formal night because the group that I was with didn't want to dress formally for the main dining room, and that suited me perfectly. It is always possible to avoid formal dress codes if you don't want to take part. I still did wear a dress to dinner most days, but I just prefer it when the dress codes are optional. Another included option which I really loved was the restaurant by the inside pool. We decided to head here for lunch and it didn't disappoint. It was in here that I found out that they had cans of Pepsi Max on board, which is my favourite drink in the world, so that was amazing. We started to think a bit about our next port, and the clues that we had to go on this time were that the port had maritime heritage, scenic waterways and modern architecture. It also mentioned historic districts with red brick buildings. I had some sort of ideas in my mind, but I definitely didn't have a final answer. If you do think you know, please let me know in the comments. The inside pool was huge and the roof here does retract. It wasn't warm enough on our cruise for anything like that, but we were very lucky with the weather. There are lots of seats around here and a bar. I loved this statue, and we decided that we would come back here later, maybe on one of the evenings when it would be quietest. Not that it was ever too busy at all though, the ship never felt busy. As well as the statue, there were lots of other pieces of art around that I thought were interesting. They were memorable for sure. This scared looking lion was close to my cabin, and they almost acted like landmarks to me. I learned my way around the ship using these fairly easily. The halloumi at the poolside restaurant is my recommendation because it is halloumi, you can't go wrong with that, but also the fish and chips, the burgers, the ploughmans. Having this as another option when we didn't fancy the buffet or the main dining room, that was fantastic. Carrying along the deck from the inside pool, we found this area at the aft. This is one of the reasons why our embarkation was late on the first day. I was a little bit nervous that our cruise might be cancelled completely when that dry dock did overrun, so I was just very happy to be on board at all. There used to be a swimming pool out here when the ship was owned by Holland America, but they removed it for some reason. I'm not really sure why, but looking at the deck plans, it looks as though they've put cabins underneath where the pool was, so they definitely can't put it back. Fred Olsen then turned this area into a garden of sorts for a while, and now they're making it into an outdoor restaurant with this big light. I still don't think I understand it completely, but we never did see it finished during our cruise. I'm just using that as a reason to say that I have to take another cruise on this ship, so that I can see the updates. We really didn't miss the extra outside space on this cruise given that it was so cold, but it would be really nice to try a warm weather cruise on this ship. I quite enjoyed seeing the progress every day actually, I kept checking on it. At one point, all of the outside decks were closed completely during the cruise, and that's because we had a medical emergency where the guest had to be taken off by helicopter. This actually isn't a rare thing at all, and looking at my cruises in Cruise Globe where I can see the routes where this happened, it seems like on 1 in 7 of the cruises I've taken, we've either had a helicopter evacuation or we've had a detour to drop off somebody just while we were sailing. I won't show you the video of the person being evacuated, of course. I think that's cruel. I get very annoyed when I see people sharing video of people who are in a bad situation, but I will show you the helicopter. I think the helicopter came from the Netherlands actually, and I really hope that the person got the care they needed and that they're okay now. It does have to be pretty serious for the best situation to be a helicopter evacuation. It is so important that you have travel insurance before you step foot on a cruise. The cost of this kind of thing, if you don't have it, can be hundreds of thousands of pounds or even more. Just head to emmacruises.com/insurance to read my full guide on how to get insurance and how to make sure that the insurance you get actually covers you. There is nothing more important when it comes to cruising, and I mean nothing. Port 1 had been good fun already, but Port 2 I had high hopes for. I was really hoping for somewhere where we could just wander off the ship. We didn't know the ports on this cruise, but we did know the itinerary in terms of when we would have sea days and when we would have port days, so I knew that the next day we would spend at sea. I didn't expect to like this ship as much as I did decor-wise, but the colourful carpets and the grand atrium were undeniably impressive. Even the public toilets felt very grand, and I never saw anything damaged or broken anywhere. Each lounge had a very distinct theme, and all of the cushions would match nicely. There was a lot of glass around, and it made a real nice change from the more modern, minimalistic design that most cruise ships do have now. This ship was actually designed by the same man who designed the world's last ocean liner, Queen Mary 2. For dinner next, we went to Colours and Tastes, which is an area that had an update during the recent refit. We sat in a table by the window to the corridor and the food was amazing. This might be my favourite specialty restaurant on any cruise ever, and it only cost £15, that's $19 per person. On some cruise lines, specialty meals can cost £50, £60, £70, over £100, so 15, I thought that was a bargain. I loved catching up with my friends at dinner too to talk about what we'd been doing during the day. We didn't put any bets on where we were going, but if we had, I think I would have put my bet on Rotterdam. I would have been wrong though. After dinner, we went to the theatre for a production show. There was some sort of show in here every day. Sometimes it would be a comedian or something like that, but the production showcast shows, they're my favourite. The theatre is split over 2 levels, and I love how much space there is for all of the seats. There's bar service and there's tables too. I enjoyed the 2 showcast shows that we watched in here. I didn't entirely understand all of the comedians' jokes, but I do think that's just because I was not the target audience, and a lot of the TV shows and the people that were mentioned, I think they were long gone before I was born, to be honest. We were so lucky on our sea day, and the sun came out on the top decks. We wandered around and I sat outside in just a t-shirt, which I never expected, sailing from the UK in November. Hey look, I'm wearing the same t-shirt right now. That was not planned. I was prepared for constant rain and rocky seas, but this was perfect. Don't get me wrong, it was around 10 degrees Celsius, which is about 50 Fahrenheit, but that was warm enough for me, and that was more than I expected. Heading inside the ship, we went to Trivia next in the Morning Light Lounge. This venue is basically the pub of the ship, and it is absolutely huge. It's almost like multiple rooms together, but that was great because that meant that a lot of people could take part in things like trivia. We had a 2-minute silence in here too because we were sailing over Remembrance Day. I don't think I've ever been on any cruise ship ever before where everybody is silent at the same time, so that was quite an experience. We gave trivia a go a couple of times and we didn't actually do too badly. We were the only table in our area that knew the answer to the question, who lives in a pineapple under the sea? So in some ways, having a difference of age was a benefit for us. The entertainment staff on board were absolutely fantastic. I do say that all the time about crew on cruise ships and how great they are, but Fred Olsen's crew were extra great. If there was a guest who needed help putting on a coat or they needed help finding a chair, the crew would be right there and they would be helping. Our cruise director, Cranny, who oversaw everything, was all that a cruise director should be. He was friendly, he was funny, and he was a recognisable face around the ship. He also had the very special task of telling us in the morning which port we were in case we hadn't worked it out. Gotta be honest, I had normally looked at Cruise Glow by that point, so I did know. The waiters were great too, and the service in the main dining room was always fast. We headed there for lunch next because we knew that they had a roast dinner on the menu, complete with Yorkshire puddings. Given that it was formal night, we didn't plan on going to the main dining room for dinner anyway, so this was perfect. I ordered a Pepsi, of course, and this was automatically charged to my onboard account. On a cruise, you don't really use money to buy things. When you order something, they'll take your room number and they'll just add it to your account. It's then charged to your bank when you leave the cruise, and you can see how much you've spent every day inside the app. We didn't spend a lot on this cruise, but I did purchase the Wi-Fi at £10, which is around $13 per day. I was very happy with it. There were a couple of websites that just wouldn't load, but I have been on cruises before where I have paid 3 times as much for Wi-Fi, so can't complain. I often have to work when I cruise, but this trip was much more focused on spending time with my friends and my dad, so I didn't need the high-speed internet for my calls. On this sea day afternoon, we had a performance in the theatre from Andy Birchfield's concert band, which was great. They played a real mix of music, and it was such a relaxing way to spend the afternoon. A real treat to have such a big orchestra on board. When we wandered back from the show, I actually came across dolphin racing in one of the bars. It isn't what you think it is, and if I just showed you the thumbnail from the video I'm about to play you, you might imagine that people are galloping along on these dolphins, but not quite. The controllers of the dolphins are told when they can move a step forward, and it is not fast. It's fun to watch though. Most of the entertainment on board was like this. It was just relaxing and family-friendly fun. I say family-friendly, there weren't any kids on this cruise at all, but you know what I mean. When everybody else went to get their formal wear on for dinner, I headed to my cabin to get into my swimming costume. The pool towels are in your cabin, and we had a whole pool to ourselves, which was such a treat. Swimming costume, of course, is another Britishism for you. I'm pretty sure some of you just call this a swimsuit, but we call it a swimming costume, which sounds very grand. The ship was rocking a little bit, so the water did splosh from side to side. It wasn't noticeable when I was out of the pool, but when you are swimming, even the slightest movement does make the water move. There are hot tubs here too, and the pool is heated. The seas were pretty calm on this cruise generally, but we did have a lot of fog, which honestly just made the whole experience more mysterious. Even when we were docked for the second mystery port, we could barely see it. Our second port was Hamburg, and I honestly wasn't expecting it. I love Hamburg, I love Germany generally, but whenever I've visited Hamburg on a cruise before, we've always docked quite far out of town, and the description that I'd seen said that we wouldn't use a shuttle bus, so I just hadn't considered it. We docked right in the middle though, at a different terminal, and we were able to just wander off and explore. It was great. It wasn't too chilly, and it didn't rain. I was hoping maybe a little bit for a port that I hadn't been to before, but I'm always happy to revisit Hamburg. It's lovely. When I first saw this cruise advertised, the lead-in price was £699 per person, which is around 920 US dollars. I did end up paying £949 for my cruise fare because I wanted to upgrade to an ocean view cabin. That was my half of the cabin fare, and my dad also paid the same. I don't regret the upgrade at all though. Our cabin was great, and the tiny bath, that made it worth it. I added on £50 for the Wi-Fi, £15 for specialty meals, £25 for gratuities, and £42 for drinks, bringing my total to £1,081, which is 1,420 US dollars. That is the kind of price that I would normally pay for a week-long cruise or longer on a more budget cruise line, but Fred Olsen aren't a budget cruise line. They're a quality cruise line, and they do what they do very well. I'm certainly going to miss those cookies, the bedtime chocolates, and the ship-shaped toilet roll on my next cruise. From one end of the traditional scale to the other, check out this video next to find out what it's like cruising with a big American casual cruise line. This ship is over double the size, and it holds an extra 3,459 guests. Once you've watched this, you will know for sure if you would prefer the traditional Fred Olsen or the more freestyle Norwegian cruise line. See you there in a second.